Thank you so much. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Ty Lawrence. Dr. Ty Lawrence is a professor of animal science at West Texas A&M University. He was reared on a cow-calf operation near Dalhart, Texas, before pursuing his BS and his master's at West Texas A&M University, and then getting his PhD at Kansas State. He spent 2 years in Smithfield before then starting his current position at West Texas A&M University. He's taught over 3,900 undergraduate students and graduate students in 29 different food and meat science courses. He's advised 6 PhDs and 43 master's students. In addition, Dr. Lawrence is the director of the WTAMU Beef Carcass Research Center, which annually evaluates over 200,000 cattle for a multitude of research entities. He and his team focus their research on improving the yield, quality, and safety of red meat products that have resulted in the publication of over 135 peer-reviewed scientific journals. Dr. Lawrence has received the AMSA Distinguished Achievement Award and Distinguished Extension Industry Award, and was the recipient of the inaugural 40 Under 40 Awards in the Agriculture from Advanced Publishing and Research Rate, and he holds the Cabinet Davis Distinguished Chair of Science at the time. So I appreciate him and him bearing me to my first packer when I came here and doing all the questions that I have. So everyone please welcome Dr. Ty Lawrence.
Okay, I don't stand well, so we'll move around a little bit, and thank you for the live mic. So a little bit into my book. So I was given this topic regarding feedlot and packing system profit drivers and what really the local Texas Panhandle industry revolves around. So if you'll allow, let me tell you a story. And I want to tell you a beef improvement story. I want to start with that picture on the left, and I want you to kind of take a look at that picture and notice a few things about that photo. Number one, what about the tail? A dressed tail on a carcass as if it were a show animal. Secondly, that's an unribbed carcass. Now let me advance so you see where I'm headed here. That image goes back to 1923 when quality grading was developed and the first set of standards in the bulletin, number 1246, titled Market Classes and Grades of Dressed Beef. That image is the pictorial standard provided to graders indicating this, folks, is what a USDA prime carcass looks like. Recall that when our grading system began, we didn't rib the carcass. When our grading system began, we only looked at the outward appearance of a carcass to estimate its level of finish. Ribbing hadn't become a thing yet. Marbling had not become a thing yet. Those were later advances and or improvements in our industry. And the yellow indicates the quality grades of the day. Now, if you'll allow me, I want to read this to you because that's the definition of a prime carcass. Prime steer beef has ideal conformation. The outlines are especially attractive and suggestive of high-grade, palatable flesh. The carcass is relatively short and blocky and is heavily and uniformly fleshed throughout. The rounds, loins, and ribs are exceptionally well developed and rounded. The chucks and plates are very compact and thick and heavily fleshed. The neck is short and plump. The shanks are short and well muscled. The bones are soft and red with blood vessels, and the carcass presents every evidence that the animal has not gone far past 3 years of age. Folks, that's where we began. We've had some significant beef improvement since then. And you in this audience and your predecessors and your ancestors are to thank for that. Give yourself a round of applause. So I want to fast forward a few years, and we had another improvement in yield grading. Now, some of you would argue today, and I would be in that camp, that it's time to redo it. But hey, this was an improvement in the 1960s. And leading up to this, many in the industry said, we're we're improving quality and we're selling cattle with more and more quality, but we're getting a tremendous amount of fat with that quality. Let's develop a system to assess the yield of a carcass in as much as how much of that carcass will end up in a box. And we did it. And that was an improvement. And let me assure you that many of us in the industry are working to improve that system yet again. And if you'll allow, I'll tell you another story about the advent of good marketing. Many of you might know Paul Engler, or might have heard of Paul Engler, or might have known Paul himself personally. So let me give you a little story. You might recall that Mr. Engler was part of IVP in the early 1970s, and then he left IVP to form Cactus Feeders. That was his second venture in cattle feeding in his history and his career. And Paul was building Cactus Feeders, and he had a friend in the Angus seed stock business whom he had tried for years to get to feed a pen of cattle. And this friend would put him off and not feed a pen of cattle and continue to put him off, et cetera, et cetera. Finally, one year, and Paul told me this happened in 1985, he convinced his dear friend, the Angus seed stock producer, to feed a pen of cattle with him. So he castrates a number of bulls, sends those steers to the original Cactus Yard in Cactus, Texas. And by sheer luck, industry luck, I'll call it, those Angus steers were placed right next to a pen of cull, Corriente roping steers. By sheer luck. Good fortune, maybe. So the dear friend comes and he observes his cattle on a regular basis. And he sees how they're gaining, and he sees how they're eating feed. He sees morbidity and mortality. He's a regular attendee at the feed. He's new to the process, wants to experience it for the first time, asks lots of questions. And while he's there, he pays particular attention to the pen of cull or any roping steers next door. Okay, so in this era, you would feed cattle about 4 months maximum. I believe Paul told me they were on feed approximately 110 days. So we get to the end of this process and it's time to market the cattle. In that era, how were cattle marketed? Live. Okay, so for those of you unfamiliar with the process, in that era, the cattle feeder, would have had a show list. And some number of pens would have been on that show list, and you're marketing that entire list to the packers. So IVP and Excel and Montfort and High Plains dressed beef and whoever else was in the market at that time would have come to your yard, they would have driven around, they would have taken the show list, they would have looked at all of those pens, and they would have said, I'll buy these pens for this price. This one price. That was what he did. So cattle buyers come, they offer Paul a price. He told me it was 67 cents. He sells the show list for 67 cents. So he calls his friend, the Angus breeder, and he says, hey, your cattle sold today, and I want you to know they topped the market. 67 cents. The friend was ecstatic. Paul, you did such a great job. Thank you. I think we'll do this again next year. This was fantastic. I learned loving about the feedlot and the process and your crew and the cowboys and da. By the way, Paul, what did the Corriente steers bring? And Paul said he thought about that for a second before he answered the question. And then he says, well, by the way, they also brought 67. And Paul told me, of all the deals in his life, that was the worst as to him. He said his friend screamed at him for about 5 minutes about genetic improvement and sire selection and saving the best heifer year over year over year over year. And my fantastic high quality steers are worth no more than the cull 480s. And then he hung up on it. And Paul said he thought about it all night. And the next morning, he called his friend at IBP and said, there has to be a better way. And that's where formula marketing began. And today, what began from an ass chewing would dominate our market. Fundamentally, that's how most all cattle are sold. In the Texas Panhandle, 93-ish% of cattle are sold in that manner. As we go north, the numbers fall a little bit, but I think as a country, we're well over 70%. So maybe a little good fortune happened by putting a pen of Angus cattle next to the Corianis. Let me reference the industry paradigm shift that has happened since that day till now. In the era of 1985, you only sold live animals. You, the cattle feeder, calculated live average daily gain, live feed to gain, live cost to gain, and you were only worried about the live weight of the animal. Beef was solely a commodity. You pushed it out the door. And you were getting no information back from the beef processor or your buyer, good, bad, or ugly. You loaded the cattle up, you weighed on the scale, you sent a weight slip in, you got paid in 24 hours. Thank you. We'll be back tomorrow. That looks completely different today. Now you sell a graded carcass. The progressive cattle feeder doesn't worry about the live animal. They're estimating the carcass weight of the animal that arrived at initial processing, and they're calculating carcass average daily gain, carcass feed to gain, carcass cost of gain. You're selling that animal based on its weight, its quality grade, its yield grade. We now have 68 branded beef programs, and information exchange is arguably multiple times a day, hundreds of times a day, thousands of times a day, constant. If there is an issue, you will know about it within the hour. The industry is in a different place. So let's talk a little bit about drivers of profitability in the feedlot. You're going to learn I have a theme here, and that theme is efficiency. Drivers of feedlot profitability, and then later drivers of beef processing profitability are going to have a lot to do with efficiency. So you see the picture on the left. That's an aerial view of a local feedlot. Those lines indicate ownership units. It's a pen, no different than your ranches. That's an efficient way to keep the cattle. Dumping all of them into a mass pen would not be efficient. Likewise, the bump is a very efficient way to deliver feed. You don't want to put a feeder out in the center of a pen. That's extremely inefficient. So the feedlot profit driver is going to have a lot to do with efficiencies. On the left, these are things that take away from efficiency. I've got 3 categories here, and do not think this is an all-inclusive list. This is just to kind of get you thinking. Number 1 is poor execution of the plan. And so in many respects, you have a manager of a yard, and that manager might have a consulting veterinarian, might have a consulting nutritionist. I shouldn't say might, they will have a consulting veterinarian and nutritionist. Those 2 people, they have a plan. Here's the plan for animal health. Here's the plan for nutrition. Poor execution of that plan diminishes profit. One example I'll give you is not implanting every animal correctly every single time. An implant is the single most beneficial return on investment a cattle operation can do. Not getting that right would diminish profit. Likewise, in the mill, if you're inconsistently flaking grain, then you're going to get inconsistent starch availability. And you'll get inconsistent returns all across the yard. That would take away from profit. The second category is resistance. Resistance to change, resistance to technology. The biggest thing I can say today is if you're in the cattle feed business and you're not feeding Experior, you're missing an opportunity. If you're feeding cattle like it's 1984, you're missing an opportunity. And the third big bullet is inconsistent strategy. Inconsistent strategy is an inefficiency, and it's a way to not keep your eye on the ball. So, yards that buy every class of cattle at every weight and every sex. That's tough to deal with. Yards that hedge this pen, but not that pen. There's no way those can lose money, so we're not gonna hedge them. We know them all. That's an inconsistent strategy. Those are profit killers. On the green side, my advice would be to use all the available technology. My advice is to optimize cost of gain and feed efficiencies. My advice is to sell every pound of hot carcass weight humanly possible. Well, at least as much as the packer will allow you to sell. We can make cattle bigger today than our beef processing capacity is ready to harvest. They know that and they're working to catch up. And then, depending on grids and thresholds, minimize quality discounts and minimize yield discounts. You'll notice I didn't say maximize premiums. In the cattle feeding business, maximizing premiums rarely works. Minimizing discounts is where the profit is. So a little bit about what cattle feeders sell today. The top image, that's a change in carcass weight. Every image from left to right is an advance of 42 days of growth. We're making cattle bigger, heavier, fatter, higher quality, and lower yield year over year over year. Most of that is good. There are some unintended outcomes and consequences to that. I want to introduce this audience to the concept of empty body fat. If this were a feedlot nutrition crowd, I wouldn't need to do that. They would inherently know what I'm talking about. But empty body fat is a metric of composition of gain that fundamentally all cattle feeding nutritionists would use to say, here's the endpoint goal for cattle. This work was conducted and published by Pablo Leroy in 2002, so we did the work obviously before that. And it would be arguably the most common metric to calculate empty body fat today. Nutritionists would say, I want to get this animal to at least 29% empty body fat to reach choice. Maybe 32% to reach premium choice. Maybe 37% to reach prime. And they're trying to get to a point where the body has enough fat reserves, it should grade all of those independent quality grades. Very, very common in cattle feeding today. We've taken that same approach and simply used yield grade to get to the same endpoint. And this equation looks like it will do the same thing that Pablo's original equation will do as well. Here's the reason I show you why that should work. And this is a fundamental reason of why people are selling less and less and less live cattle and more and more and more carcass cattle today. Remember the words carcass transfer. And that may be a horrible name. I'm not going to argue it's correct or incorrect. But what I want you to think about is every time an animal gains a pound, some of that stays on to what will be the carcass. Some of that is the hide, the feet, legs, the head, the guts, the things that are non-carcass. If you look at my graph, you see days on feed and you see carcass transfer on the y-axis. Carcass transfer is the proportion of the live weight that stays on the carcass. The balance of that would be the proportion of the live weight that is non-carcass. So you'll notice when cattle are very young and green at approximately 42 days on feed, the carcass transfer is only about 66%. So 66% of every pound they gain stays on the carcass. 34% of every pound they gain is non-carcass. But what happens to that number as they get heavier and fatter? Well, let me tell you, the hide slows in its growth. The head, the feet, the legs, the viscera, they all slow in their growth, and more and more and more and more of those pounds are retained on the carcass. When we get out past 300 days on feed, 80% of every pound is on the carcass. Trust me, the math says sell a carcass, don't sell a live animal. And then look at my yellow boxes. In this research, at 150 days on feed, the cattle were actually gaining 3.68 a day live. Those same cattle were gaining 266 every day in the carcass. As we advance to 250 days, they're gaining 334 per day live. They're gaining 258 per day in the carcass. Those are pounds. And then at 350 days, they're gaining 313 live and 255 in a carcass. And you might say, well, why did you just keep feeding them? You just keep feeding them because they're still making money. Your daily gain in value is much greater than your daily cost to keep one another day around. Same data, but now the math. With Friday's beef prices, that's how much you're gaining every day live and how much you're gaining every day in the carcass at those day on feed endpoints. The math says feed the animal until you finally cannot get it to the packer. Trust me, we can feed cattle today at much bigger weights and be profitable than you've ever considered. I know of a cattle feeder today that is feeding cattle 2,300 pounds. Those are 1,500 pound carcasses. The math works. You just got to find a packer willing and able to slaughter said animal. You may or may not agree with me, but before the end of my career, 1,500 pound carcass might be normal. 1,000 pound carcass is normal today. In Nebraska, 1,100 pound carcass is normal. We're not that far away. Again, I know one group doing it today. I'm going to switch to beef processing profit drivers. And let me tell you a little bit about the image there on the left. That's a local Tyson beef processing facility. It was built in 1974, has operated for 51 years on the original kill floor. They processed approximately 77 million cattle in the original kill floor. And let me tell you, it was worn out. It was held together with duct tape, baling wire, and zip ties. They just opened the new kill floor. And I don't know if I can point to it or not, but it's kind of protruding out to the left near the highway on the southwest corner of that photo. Day one was rough. Day two was a little better. Day three was a little better. I was there on day 4. On day 4, in a brand new kill floor, they hit the goal, which was 390 cattle an hour. And now they're off and running. It took them 4 days to go from, holy moly, this was a rough day, to full steam. With beef modernization, they will supersede 390. They'll get to 400, they'll get to 410. I predict in the next 5 years, they'll get to 420. This will be the fastest beef processing facility in the world. It'll take a few years, but they'll get there. It's a machine. 77 million cattle on the first kill floor. This one will last another 50 years. And I say that because as we came out of COVID, a lot of people said, wow, I'm going to build a slaughterhouse. I'm going to kill my own beef. That's a math lesson you're probably not ready for. Trust me. It's a tough business. This is not easy to get into. There are 10 facilities of that size in America. Those 10 facilities kill half our beef on a daily basis. The remaining 40-ish facilities of varying sizes kill the other half. The math says build a monster machine, push cattle through it as efficiently as possible. That's where the beef processing profit is made. Now, within each of those facilities, regardless of size, issues on the left take away from efficiency, and then those on the right produce efficiency. Number one is cattle lameness. If the cattle don't want to walk out of the pen and up into the knock box, you're slowing down productivity. That has been an issue at times. Food safety is also in that realm. And don't leave here saying, I said food safety was inefficient. What I want you to hear is assuring food safety for all of that beef that leaves is sometimes inefficient because we're going to make sure it's safe. And there's sometimes that the packer has to play catch up because of pen conditions at a cattle feeding location. Carcasses that don't fit, and you're gonna say, wait, you just told me they could get to 1,500 pounds. I did, but the cattle feeder in some respects is ahead of the beef processor. You can make it faster or bigger, faster than they're ready to accept it. So there's a bit of antagonism right there. And then the last one is chain stops and railings. That's typically associated with an abscess, maybe a liver abscess, maybe a lung abscess, maybe a lung lesion, and or severe bruising. That place is meant to run non-stop. It is not meant to stop and start and stop and start and stop and start. I want to tell you another quick story here. One of my graduate students is in the pork processing industry right now. She called me last week and she said they just started a new program. Walk off, walk on. The chain never stops. So it's your 15-minute break. You've been running for 2 hours. It's time for you to take your 15-minute break. You walk off. Somebody right behind you walks onto your spot and you just keep rolling. The chain does not stop. Same at lunch break. Same at your third break. Think about that a minute. The chain does not stop. That doesn't get more efficient than that. In cattle, the maximum speed is 390 an hour. With modernization, that will go up. Maximum hours are 16 of productivity, unless you're going to pay a little bit of overtime. So the math says you kill 6,240 cattle a day. Again, there's 10 facilities that can do that theoretically. That's half our beef population. I told you the math says make them bigger. The packer math says make them bigger. You're only going to see that throughout history. They need to maximize weight per employee. I'm gonna pick up my friend Andy Holloway over here, do a little math lesson. Andy, let's say all of a sudden you're over at a beef processing facility, you find yourself on the gut line. Okay? We're gonna pay you $35 an hour, and we're gonna give you 25 seconds to gut an animal on a moving chain, actually a moving table. It's actually kind of a cool job. You'll be thrilled. So here comes a 1,000-pound carcass. I'm going to pay you $35 an hour. I'm going to give you 25 seconds to gut that 1,000-pound carcass. The one right behind it weighs 500 pounds. I'm still going to pay you $35 an hour, and I'm still going to give you 25 seconds. The math says every person in that facility needs to be processing the heaviest animal we can fit through the door. And that's why you have seen carcass weights climb year over year over year. And that's why you've seen heavyweight discounts move up and up and up and up. Their math assuredly says we need to slaughter a bigger animal tomorrow than we do today. In the beef processing world, we don't focus enough in this room about harvest yields. But that is often the lifeblood of a kill plant. So you read my note there, sell everything possible and then figure out how to sell everything else. That's real. If they could bottle the mood, they would sell it. They're going to figure out how to sell everything for a price. And then you read marketing, maximize the marketing opportunity. So I'll go through a couple of slides real quick and then wrap up. I mentioned lameness. So as we add days to get bigger cattle, it's nothing to deliver a 16, 17, 18, 1900 pound animal today. Nothing at all. It's becoming quite normal. In fact, for cattle to weigh easily at 18 or 1900 pounds as a pen. Individuals are weighing a ton, 21, 2200. They're not used to standing on concrete. They're for sure not used to deep grooved concrete. And we're getting more and more lameness issues if the processor hasn't prepared for that. So let me show you an image of a local processor. They were very proactive, realizing cattle are not going to get lighter in weight. So rather than redoing the concrete per se, they put trailer mats everywhere. And I'm really impressed with the next picture, and I want you to take a look at that. What do you see about the cattle in the middle? Laying down. That does not happen on 4x4 deep groove concrete. They're laying down. They're comfortable. They're resting. That is an ideal layering situation. Rather than being an anomaly, those trailer mats should be in place in every slaughterhouse in America. We as an industry need to make sure that happens. That plant has virtually eliminated lameness issues solely by changing from those cattle standing on deep groove concrete to those cattle standing on a 1-inch thick trailer mat. Wasn't inexpensive for them to do, but it has saved them a tremendous amount of headache for those cattle. All right, a little bit about food safety. E. coli continues to be something our industry deals with every day. Don't think we've solved it. Now, we've put a numerous hurdles in place to virtually eliminate the risk, but I do want you to know it's something that we deal with still every day. Those of you that, maybe I don't know if anybody's taken my food science class, back in the day when I taught food science, I used to really highlight number one. The most dangerous thing to eat is salad. Beef is not the most dangerous thing to eat. Salad actually is. But this is an outbreak report from the CDC. We've got some work to do even still today. And so the bottom picture is something that the packer has to deal with. And if the mud is severe enough and the tag is severe enough, we got to pull the chin tube down to cut through the mud, to cut through the tag, to take it off before we open up the hide. Because I want you to imagine you're this guy. And that level of tag is actually pretty minor. Imagine baseball tag, imagine softball tag, imagine basketball tag. Tag on the hide can get pretty severe. And you're him, and you've got less than 9 seconds to cut through that and try to not contaminate the carcass. What are the odds? They're not at all in your favor. So sanitary dressing and assuring sanitary dressing, because of pen conditions and how the cattle come in, can often be an efficiency killer. I've seen it many, many times. Long carcasses are the issue moreover than big carcasses. So most cattle are not measured with length. Most people think about that as hip height or a metric similar to that. But this picture comes from the blood pit at the Cargill facility in Dodge City, Kansas. And these Holstein steers are well above the blood pit. And you're probably thinking, what is he talking about? That's not an issue at all. And right here it's got it. But about 100 cattle later in the processing line, when the old kill floor meets the new kill floor, that same animal will probably be dragging at the front shanks if somebody doesn't pick it up and hook it to prevent that. So long carcasses are something that the processor has to deal with. And we should maybe do a little calisthenics lesson. Get you to think about this. Andy, how long does he have to gut that animal? 25 seconds. There's typically 6 or 7 people in a row, and they're working in literally a circle. Notice where the shanks and the neck of that carcass are. That's at his feet. So he's pulling out the viscera right now. As soon as the viscera are on the table, he'll take his foot and he'll push it over because it doesn't drop anymore. In an ideal situation, the front shanks would be about 2, maybe 3 feet off the table, so that they can literally drop somewhere. Well, those days are gone. So it comes out and you see him pulling, and then he's gonna push over with his foot to get it out of the way. And then, Andy, he's gonna be standing and bend all the way over and cut the lung, heart, and trachea out. Because it's at his feet. That's ergonomically difficult on a moving table in 25 seconds. I mean, these people are good, but there's some ergonomic challenges. So that often leads to a chain stop. And you probably won't think much about it. But with a few exceptions, every time the chain stops in the day, that's 1 animal we don't kill tonight. So 30 chain stops on A shift, that's 30 cattle we don't kill tonight. 30 chain stops on B shift, that's 30 more cattle we don't kill tonight. That's 2 trucks. Doesn't sound like much. And in today's market, 2 trucks, no big deal. In other markets, 2 trucks might be a big deal. And it might be a big deal even if it was your 2 trucks, because now your cattle are sitting there overnight. Let's talk about chain stops and rail lines. They are the most killers of inefficiency in beef processing. Liver abscesses, open abscesses, and severe adhesions are reasons that the processor would have to stop the line. To get that cut out of the animal, with few exceptions, required the line to be stopped. And it's typically not a slow, you just stop it, get it cut out, start it up again. Okay? If you had to do that, you for sure had to stop the line. That's what we would call a flanker. That's becoming too common in our industry because the intestines are glued with fiber and connective tissue to the inside of the cavity of the animal. And liver abscesses aren't the only reason to blame, but they're probably the dominant reason for rail stops. Beyond that, you have to rail the carcass out more and more and more frequently. And then somebody had to trim it off. So a beef processor will have 2 to arguably 7 employees at the largest facility I can think of, dedicated to rail outs. And so the animal comes offline, and that's a negative for you. Our data, collecting data for years and years and years now on 3 million plus carcasses, say that if your animal is railed out, on average, it will weigh 93 pounds less than its inmates as a carcass. Being a rail out is about the last thing you want for your animals. And part of the problem is the system, if you will. The government says, rail it out. Okay? There is no information transfer between the USDA and the beef processing team as to why. So the beef processor is going to trim it up such in manner that it doesn't come back. They're going to over trim it. That's a commonality because of the lack of information transfer. And I'm not here to tell you it's right. I'm here to tell you it's real. On average, 93 pounds less than the pen mate if it gets railed out. In this case, it would have been pretty obvious. there would have been purulent material chemicalware, the open access. And I don't remember that one exactly, but I'm guessing that was well over 200 pounds of trim to get all of that product off. Bigger than that is now you're selling number 2 product. So if you look at where the sternum was on that carcass, there's part of a brisket left. How many of you are in the market for number 2 brisket? Nobody's in the market for number 2 brisket. How about number 2 chuck roll or part of a chuck roll? Nobody's in the market for that. So everything that's left on that chuck, with few exceptions, is now trim. And the rib is ruined on the left side. So it's bigger than just the loss in weight. We have an amount of number 2 product that we don't need in the industry. Advanced lung lesions are also reasons the carcasses get railed out. So severe BRD causes fibrin tank formation that adheres the lung to the rib cage. That cannot all come out at gutting. And so if the final trim rail cannot get it off, it will get railed out. And you can imagine what happens next. All of that gets cut out. Okay. Have you ever seen a more severe bruise? Those are real. After they trim that off, imagine a carcass that weighs 400 pounds less. Be careful in animal handling. And if you have a buller issue, take care of it well in advance of the animals being shipped for harvest. I'll wrap this up with maximizing weight per employee. I mentioned already that cattle are going to get bigger. The math says they're going to get bigger. The trend line says they're going to get bigger. All indications say they're going to get bigger. If any one of you is paid a premium for a slower growing, smaller, lighter weight calf, let me know. I think everybody in here is probably paid on pounds. The cattle feeder is paid on pounds. The beef processor is paid on pounds. Everybody's incentive is to sell more what? Pounds. That's what's going to happen. Our industry is going to make heavier cattle. Someday, one of you young people in here is going to say, an old bald guy said, carcasses would weigh 1,500 pounds. Maybe it happens after I retire, but I'm a little bit skeptical. The day is coming. I have actually seen the carcasses. I know it's possible. The days are coming. If you're a processor, you're in the business of maximizing harvest yields. All of those things are very common. All of those things have a USDA market value. I can sell inedible tallow and make biodiesel. I can sell rumen and reticulum tripe for food. I can sell hide for King Ranch Fords, tongues to Japan, lips to Mexico, head meat to Mexico, heart. Anybody ever had a hot link sausage? Hot link sausage. Second ingredient on almost every hot link sausage label is beef heart. If it's not beef heart, it's going to be pork heart. Liver to Egypt. Meat and bone meal to the chicken industry. Lungs to pet food. Oxtail for soup. Cheap meat for barbacoa. Blood meal for pig nursery diets. Those things all have inherent value. They're sold in mass quantity every day. And then as you are there, at least as much as I'm there, you see everything else people are selling. How about aorta? Honey, let's have beef broth and aorta tonight. Those are words I've never said to my wife. She would slap me. I think I may try it tonight. That's a product. Sold in China. Take an aorta, clean it, dice it like green onions, put it in beef broth to provide texture. May not be a market for you, but it is a market. There's a value. It's worth saving, putting it in a box, freezing it, and shipping it overseas. And so are all of those other products. If you're in the beef business, you're finding a value for all of that stuff and getting it sold in mass quantity. And then lastly, I'll wrap up with some of the tremendous benefit this group has had a hand in. Maximizing the marketing opportunity, and in the beef processing world, this is by sorting it more. So it used to be choice. Well, now it's top choice, premium choice, low choice. And we're taking choice and we're cutting it into marbling scores in some categories. We're now sorting select multiple ways. I know one program is sorting select 3 ways. That's pretty finite to sort select 3 ways. We're branding more products than ever before. We're adding value by telling a story that resonates with the consumers Dr. Carr just talked about. Thank you for all the work and the genetic progress that you have done for our industry. That's all I have, but I'll be glad to take any questions if that's an opportunity.
So Dr. Lawrence, since you picked on me, I can ask the first question.
Amen.
So what's the progress being accomplished on liver abscesses? Where are we on all that?
Well, we're not making progress very fast. Let me give you a quick story. So Andy's question was, what's the progress on liver abscess? So you would think it's negative progress, actually. Real quickly, when my mentor, Ted Montgomery, began in West Texas State University in 1974, he goes around to all of the beef processors and the young faculty and introduces himself. Says, on a new year, the legislature put this facility in Panhandle to serve the budding beef processing industry. And the plant manager at IDP took him up on that offer for help and said, hey, we're having a problem with liver abscesses. And at the time, that era, 13% was abscess. There were pins with no issues. Well, today, if you had a cattle feeder with only 13% abscesses, that'd be fantastic. There are pins of cattle today that are 80, 90, 100%. And the chain might stop every other animal. So we're actually going in the wrong direction, but that's a whole other discussion for another day. We've got miles of improvement to make. And I'm beginning to wonder if we want to. Oh, question.
Say we can gonna start making 1,500 pound carcasses that are doing. What are we gonna do with 23 inch ribeye?
We're gonna cut it in half. Or we're gonna market it in a unique cutting method. There is no signal large enough that says stop. People are so thrilled to get the beef today. That's not even a conversation. One of our local packers told me last week, they are already sold out. Hear those words, sold out through 2027. Everything they feel is already spoken for. So it's not about size. It's about availability. That could come someday, but I don't forecast it. We, meatheads like myself, Dr. Schwartz, and Dr. Carr, and others in this room, we're gonna have to figure out a little innovation. How do you cut it in a way that is appealing? I don't need 23 inch ribeye. I certainly don't want one that's a 1/4 inch thick to get a 10-ounce weight cut. But there's no math in the industry that says turn the ship around. Even if there was math to do, or even if the math said to do it, it's way more difficult than you think at this point. Everybody's paid on weight. You would have to change the payment scheme to something other than weight. turn the ship around. There's no economic incentive to do that. Okay.
Follow-up question on that proportion size. We've watched it for several years and been told we just gotta cut that ribeye. I think, and maybe this isn't a question, maybe it's a request. As an industry, we've got to get probably with the factor and teach them how to do that because food service retail has shown that they're not going to. They're gonna keep on making it thinner and thinner, and every time they do that, we have more unsatisfied customers. So I guess a plea to the industry, let's figure out who is actually cutting those. And let's start doing it at an earlier stage. If the grocery store, wholesalers, chefs aren't.
That's fair. So we need a ribeye version of the Manhattan strip.
Exactly.
I agree wholeheartedly. Trent, you working on that? Yeah. Any other questions? No, right.
How much value is in the drop in the offal today?
Approximately 180 to 200, depending on size of the animal. So the largest driver of drop credit value today is tallow, inedible or edible. Fundamentally, when an animal walks into the kill floor today, that live animal is 1/3 empty body fat. So you're taking all of that tallow, particularly from the gut table and other trim off the kill floor, you're making inedible tallow. Most of that's going into either biodiesel or feed production. And then all of the tallow that comes off of the kill floor, so they excess fat trim, KPH, if it made it that far, that can go into edible tallow. Think cosmetics, think soaps, sanitizers, things that could touch your skin or go into your body. So those are the biggest drivers today. Hides, what people have historically thought of a big driver of value, fundamentally none, and some packers would call it a liability today. A hide has $25 of value unless that's sold. You might get $50 of value if you have a blue chrome tanner. Hides are becoming a liability real fast.
On the subject of tallow, there's been some popular discussion of tallow becoming widespread, item. When will we be able to see that showing up?
Can you repeat that a little louder?
Yeah, there's been widespread discussion of tallow being more, broadly adopted in domestic food service, changing nutritional and health factors. When will we actually see that showing up in the marketability of domestic tallow?
Okay, so the question was, tallow has seen, improved resonance, if you will. I think it's basically steak shape.
Yeah.
And when will we see that more widely adopted?
No, when will that affect the actual pricing?
When will that affect tallow prices?
Yeah.
So, I don't know, in short. If a large retailer, I'm not gonna say steak and shake is large, think McDonald's level, Burger King level, Wendy's level, if they adopted it, we would see a shift in the market. We would need widespread adoption into beef tallow to see that shift. And the customers are gonna have to demand it, or it's gonna have to become price effective. One or the other, over the common, which would be soybean oil. Oh, in short, I don't know. Great question, though.